Blessings. Good evening. As you know, the southern part of Australia in the last few days had very strong windy weather. They say it's the coming together of the hot winds from the warm north and the cold winds from the Antarctic in the south coming together and mixing and causing storms, thunder and lightning, hailstorms in this kind of windy weather. And so many Buddhists will immediately think of the Buddha's teaching about the worldly winds that blow us around through our life. And a reminder of how wise and skillful the Buddha was as a teacher. He used many similes of very ordinary things that happen in life to explain simple but profound truths, such as the fact that as human beings were affected by these different conditions that come our way. They tend to come in pairs. Just as the north wind is hot and the south wind is cold, life is full of ups and downs. We call it the four pairs of worldly winds, the four pairs of gain and loss, praise and blame, status and loss of status, and pleasure and pain, or happiness and suffering. And our minds are like the little leaves on trees blown around by the wind. Whatever direction the wind comes from, the leaf moves. Our aim is to develop some clarity and mindfulness and understanding so that we can cope with the worldly winds rather than sitting there wishing that they would just disappear or end. Actually develop the skills and the understanding and the peace and clarity to deal with the worldly winds and not create suffering out of them. As the Buddha pointed out, our suffering is caused by unawareness, ignorance, creating craving and attachment in our minds. And this is in reaction or resulting from the effects of the worldly winds that blow us around. We attach to pleasure as much as pain. It's just this, because it's pleasure, we don't notice the attachment so much. We tend to indulge and follow. Pain is more obviously unpleasant, but instead of establishing mindfulness, equanimity, and seeing the nature of pain is impermanent, not self, we tend to react with aversion to painful experiences. Either way, pleasure or pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, and so on, they push the mind around. If there's no foundation in the practice, we haven't listened to the Dhamma, we haven't practiced, then they push us around. And we suffer. Suffering comes up when we have this strong sense of self arise in response to these experiences, and we identify with them as me, mine, myself. It becomes like something very personal. The most obvious ones are just the normal experience humans have. We get older every day. Sometimes we get sick, ill, injured, and then we all have to face death. We're going to die and our loved ones are going to die. As soon as we take that to be self, we suffer. As the Buddha pointed out, there's no birth, without death. There's no youth without aging follows. And health is followed by sickness. Maybe many times in our life you get sick and then you recover and then you get sick again later. It's not one thing, it's another. These are already expressing these worldly winds, pairs of experience that push us around. Intellectually we tend to understand, everyone knows we get older every day, everyone knows, well, sometimes we get sick, injured. Everybody knows one day we've got to die. But that's knowing with the intellect. Of course, when the experience actually comes, then you get the movement of the wind, caused by the wind, triggered by the wind. The movement is in the heart, in the mind, deep down. You still get your emotional reactions coming up. So nobody likes aging, particularly the physical manifestation of aging, appearance of the body, the aches and pains, the degeneration of the faculties, sense faculties and so on. No one likes that. We know it's just part of the human cycle of existence. But when it happens, we're not happy about it. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants death, but we all know oneself, others have to die. We know the truth of that superficially, but when it happens, it's always a hugely impactful emotional experience. You suffer. I don't want this. You're identifying with that experience of maybe loss of a loved one, or possibly your own, facing your own loss. And the grief comes with death, can last for months and years. Strong emotion. So you can say, well, I knew I would have to die, and my loved ones would have to die. But the heart doesn't yet know. It's not yet quiet. And so many other things express the Dhamma in this way. Things that you know are true, but the mind only knows on the intellectual level, it doesn't yet know. Deep down, mindfulness, insight isn't established. We know all our material possessions, the things we own, are impermanent. They're going to wear out, or break, or we lose them. Still we get annoyed when it happens. The mind is, even though it does understand things, the theory, the intellectual understanding is there, the heart still reacts, it still moves under the influence of these worldly winds. Why me? Why now? If you get sick, why me? Why now? Something you use breaks, say you use a car and you have to go to work and then the car breaks down. Why now? Why has this happened to me? And we create conspiracy theories, the world is against me just because something that was bound to happen and is. So the Buddha encouraged us to cultivate the path of Dhamma, to help us cope with this and ultimately to bring the mind to peace even when the worldly winds are blowing, even if they're blowing strongly, intensely. When we establish mindfulness and practice mindfulness regularly, when we reflect on the Dhamma, contemplate it, bring it into our hearts so that we know more intuitively that things are impermanent. We don't own them, we can't control them. Then the mind more quickly comes to calm even when we're facing change and unexpected changes, unexpected difficulties, obstacles that come up. The heart, the mind can cope because we've been developing the path of Dhamma, the practice. Some people say when you become a Buddhist monk or a nun, monastic, you're escaping from the real world and you're living in this make-believe reality where people bring you food and you don't have to go out, earn a living, work, do these things, and what we might call the normal, real life of a human being. So people assume somehow that we're immune to the worldly winds or protected against them, don't have to face up to them. But it's just the same for monks and monastics. Just they may come up in different ways, slightly different ways, but they're still affecting the mind. And literally the wind affects you maybe more in the living in a forest monastery. You go out, you encounter the wind all the time, or the rain, or the heat, or the cold. If you live in a city or an urban area, you've got all the buildings and heating and cooling systems and ways to protect yourself. You've got vehicles, cars to get into when it's raining and so on. Sometimes forest monks have to face the real world even more up close. The wind blows, trees fall down, fall on your hut, they fall in front of you, behind you, on your head occasionally. And of course the mind is susceptible to these winds as well. The mind still reacts. Many times I can remember when the wind blows here, when there's a storm, strong winds, often it reminds me of events in my life as a monk in other places. So I remember one time I was in Chiang Mai, northern Thailand, many years ago, 30 years ago or more, and some of my friends were camping out in the forest on a little hill. They invited me to go and stay with them. And I had been in another area nearby on my own, meditating, camping in the forest, and then my friend said, "Oh, come to this spot, it's really nice." And it was an area, there was a big mountain called Indra's Mountain, Indra as in the Lord of the Devas. And this was a little hill, like a little stupa-shaped, chedi-shaped mountain in front of Indra's Mountain. And the monks were camped on that hill. And at the base of the hill there was a stream where we could collect water, and also at the base of the hill on the other side was a village. We could go and collect some alms food in the morning, so we had a way to survive. But we're just camping out in the forest. I remember one day we went down into the forest. There's three of us who walked into the village to collect food. And the villagers were very friendly, and many different houses gave us a little bit of food every day, so we got plenty to eat. But one man seemed to be agitated, and when he gave us some food, but then he launched into call it a tirade, where he complained about monks, and he thought monks were bad and Buddhism was bad, and he thought monks were lazy, they didn't work, and monks don't do anything good for society, and why do we need more monks anyway? Because we hardly knew the man, I got the impression that maybe he was, there was something deeper to it, why he would suddenly have this outburst. So I asked him, is there something wrong? Because he seemed very upset. And he said, "You just want to take our land away." Because he had this idea that maybe the monks were going to take some of the local forest and build a monastery, which wasn't our intention. We were there just passing through, as is customary and traditional in Thailand. Monks go on tudong, we call it tudong, wandering through the forest. And camp and use natural water supplies, and if there are kind people around we can get food, but we had no intention to take anybody's land or build a monastery or anything like that. The land we were staying on was actually state forest, so we had no right to it, but we were allowed to stay there temporarily, just camping. Anyway, this man got it in the idea that somehow we might steal his land or someone's land. So he was upset, and this is why he got very angry and critical of the monks. So we walked on, just contemplated the words he had said, because he'd been very negative. And went back to our spots in the forest, had our meal, carried on meditating for the day. So in the late afternoon I began sitting meditation, and I thought, I was just contemplating these worldly winds, how as a monk you receive some praise and friendliness, kindness, and then sometimes you can receive criticism, sometimes it's justified, sometimes it's not. And contemplating like this made me think of the Buddha. Now the Buddha said, well, he sat and his aim was to establish mindfulness and see these worldly winds as impermanent, suffering, not self, not to be clung to as self, empty of self. And on the night of his enlightenment, he meditated all night and didn't move, didn't get up, and established mindfulness and contemplated in this way. So I was inspired. I thought, oh, normally I can sit without moving for, if I sat in full lotus, in those days I used to sit in full lotus, which puts quite a lot of strain on the legs and the knees, but I used to sit for about an hour to an hour and a half without moving. I thought, well, today I should put more effort into my practice. I'll try and sit for 3 hours without moving. And I was thinking of the Buddha, and I was also thinking, today we received some criticism, so I have to quieten my mind, not react or give in to any emotions because of this criticism. I know the criticism is impermanent, not self with my intellect, but there's still, I have to make sure my heart doesn't move with it. So I decided to sit for 3 hours, and after I decided that, I began sitting, and after about 5 minutes, the wind came, strangely. Normally the weather was fairly still and stable and blue skies, but that day it decided to rain, and a terrible storm came up very quickly. And probably it was just coincidence, but it seemed like as soon as I made my determination to sit for 3 hours without moving, something had been stirred in the atmosphere, and now the storm came in, and I was camping in the forest, so it wasn't in a building. And the wind got stronger and stronger, and trees started to sway, and branches started to fall down. Animals in the forest were running around, and then the rain came, and the thunder and the lightning, and the longer I sat, the worse the weather got. So it seemed like something was trying to test my resolve. As soon as you make a resolve, then something will come along and test you. And in the end, it wasn't so much the weather that was the test, it was my own pain in my legs. You sit without moving for 3 hours and you don't normally, then that puts a lot of strain on your muscles, your knees. So in the end, that became the real test. The real worldly winds were inside. I couldn't blame anyone else for the pain in my legs. My poor intellect understood that's just being a human being. If you sit and don't move, your legs start to hurt. I couldn't blame anyone else, couldn't blame the weather, couldn't blame anyone. I just had to accept this is the way it is when you sit and you don't move. So I kept sitting and put effort into that till got a lot of sweat coming up because the weather was warm even though there was a terrible storm raging. And I got to the point where I couldn't tell the difference between my sweat and the rain that was splashing in. I had an umbrella over me. That wasn't very much to protect myself. So some rain would splash in, and then the sweat was coming as well. So sweat and rain mixed. Couldn't tell whether it was the rain or the sweat. But I was getting drenched. And I just kept sitting, contemplating what the Buddha taught. And the Buddha said, well, pleasure is impermanent and pain is impermanent. These feelings, whether physical or mental, they arise, they pass away, they're temporary, and they're not self. They're to be seen as, or viewed as just phenomena that arise and cease, without clinging, without craving. So I was determined to sit at least for 3 hours without moving, and I just kept contemplating like that. And the storm kept raging, and it's like there's a storm in the mind, the pressure of the pain, painful feelings. And there's a storm outside, the pressure of the weather. And then even just thinking of recalling the events and the unhappy man who had been criticizing the monks. It was like another storm. So it seemed like the world was full of storms. So I just determined just to keep mindful of my breath, my main meditation object, and just keep practicing. And strangely enough, when I reached about 3 hours, then the mind became very still. It wasn't moved by the pain, and wasn't moved by the weather, wasn't moved by the memory of the man scolding us. And it became very peaceful, still. And very straightforward to contemplate impermanence and not self. Memories are memories, they arise, pass away. Feelings are feelings, they arise, they pass away. Thoughts are thoughts, they arise, pass away. The body is the body, the weather is the weather. And the mind became very still, just contemplated that. Because once the mind became still, all the mental suffering dropped away, then the storm passed. As if the storm was there to do a certain duties, perform a certain role, to test my resolve, and then when it no longer was needed because the mind became peaceful, then the storm passed, disappeared, and the weather went quiet again. So for me personally, that was a very good meditation, but it was also just a reflection on the worldly winds like that. Things come up and then they go away again. And strangely enough, the next morning, the family came to visit us. We went on our alms round in the village as usual, and we came back to eat our meal in the forest, and a family we knew came to visit, and they had a lot of faith. And one of the ladies in the family, the head of the family, who was retired but was reasonably well off, she was saying exactly what the man had said the previous day, but in reverse. And where he had said, "Oh, monks are so lazy," she said, "Oh, you monks, you practice so hard and put forth so much effort. And you're so useful to the society. To have monks around is so useful. We need more monks, more temples, more monasteries." Everything that the man had said that was negative or critical, this lady said in the opposite. Each person was unsolicited. We didn't ask for the man to criticize us, but we didn't ask for the lady to praise us either, or say these positive things. Just by chance. So I was contemplating, that's praise and blame, isn't it? Wherever you go, you'll get both. They come together as a pair. And worldly winds are like that. And that lady actually went on later, not that day, but later she went on and purchased some forest and offered it to the monks to build a monastery in a slightly different area from there. So everyone will have those experiences, praise and blame, success, failure, ups and downs, pleasant feelings, painful feelings, all kinds of pairs of experience will come our way as we practice in life. And the aim is to bring up the Dhamma, isn't it? Bring up mindfulness, bring up insight, to free your mind from the experience of dukkha, suffering. When we don't do that, then the suffering becomes very real, very personal. I'm in pain, I've been criticized, I'm a failure. You notice when you begin practicing meditation or practicing the Dhamma, often the first way you respond to dukkha is you blame other people for it. It's always, this person makes me suffer, or else external conditions like the weather, or, I'm hungry, so I'm suffering, I'm not getting what I want, I'm suffering, I'm ill, or it's other people, what they say, what they do. It's always the external things. And as you keep practicing, then you tend to bring your mind in a bit closer, but then you start blaming yourself for your suffering. You might call that slight evolution. So you don't blame others so much for your suffering. What they say and do, it becomes, oh, me, I'm just no good. I've got too much karma, I've done too many bad things, I've got no luck, I'm hopeless, blah, blah, blah. But it may be still better than blaming other people, but it's still very negative and wrong. It's not correct, is it? You're just finding a scapegoat in yourself. And there's no self anyway, so who is this self you're blaming? It's just an idea. But then you move on through the practice, and the aim is to get to the point where you're not blaming anyone. You're seeing things as just causes and conditions. Causes and conditions, they arise, they pass away. There's actually no self involved. The aim of our practice is to remove the feeling of dukkha, which means remove the feeling of self, or the sense of ownership of experience. So you may still have these experiences, but you know them as they are, as not self. And if you can see not self, there's no one to blame. And we all have to go through pleasure and pain, pleasant experiences, unpleasant experiences. That's life, isn't it? Whatever you're doing, whether it's to do with work, family, health, society, that's the nature of the world. It's constantly changing. The Buddha is encouraging us not to create suffering out of the way things are. And these changes often are completely out of our control anyway. And even when things are slightly under our control, it doesn't change the fact that conditions change. You might be able to affect change a bit, slow it down, or make things not so, impact you not so badly. So, say the wind comes, well, maybe you can build a house and go indoors out of the wind or the rain or the sun. When you're hungry, well, you can go and get some food. We do what we can to reduce the pain, the suffering, but you can never completely get rid of it because it's the nature of the world. But even better is to understand it as the nature of the way things are. Understand it as Dhamma. Where there is hunger, well, then you can eat and feel full, and then there'll be hunger again. Where your thirst is quenched, and later you'll feel thirst. When you're tired, you need to sleep, and then after sleeping you wake up, you can get up and do other things. You notice when the feeling of suffering is so strong, you can't even sleep at night. Worry, anxiety. Some people, when it's thunder and lightning, they can't sleep, worrying about what might happen. Sometimes just anxiety about their health, or money, work, problems with other people. It's another way the Buddha described himself. He said, I sleep very well. I'm one of those people who sleeps well. So even the Buddha would sleep, but he just didn't sleep with stress, no dukkha, no suffering. And one of the benefits of seeing suffering, seeing through it, letting go of it, is you sleep well. You don't have anxiety bothering you when you're trying to fall asleep. You just fall asleep. Dukkha, the mind of dukkha, suffering, always has its cause. It's where there's clinging, craving, clinging, attaching. Attached to pleasure, and then you worry you'll lose it. Or you get annoyed when you do lose it, when it ends. You're attached to pain, and you don't like it, so you try to push away, get away from it, get it away from you. You can't always do that. All of this leads to mental agitation, anxiety. Sometimes we focus on the smallest little thing. Maybe trying to fall asleep. It's the tiniest little itch or pain. If your mind dwells on it, then you won't fall asleep. Or even pleasure keeps you awake, doesn't it? Really excitement, stimulation, anticipation of pleasure, and you're so excited I can't sleep. That can lead on to more trouble because if you don't sleep then your body is not so healthy. You're even not sleeping through anticipation of excitement and getting the thing you want can bring you suffering. And that's the mind that hasn't yet seen the Dhamma, established mindfulness, still being pushed around by the worldly winds. You can't sleep properly, sometimes you can't eat, can't you? When your mind is in strong, the emotions come up strongly, you can't eat. Too excited, too angry, too depressed, too afraid. So very, very normal functions get interrupted when the mind has dukkha, when you're attached with this sense of self. You can't concentrate, you can't do activities like walking. Sometimes you're so emotional, you can't walk straight or walk properly, you can't do some task because your mind is too agitated by something. When the emotions come up strongly, you often become clumsy, sometimes paralyzed, we can't function. All of this is like the effects of the worldly winds on the mind. The Buddha encouraged us to bring up the mindfulness. When you're mindful, you tend to calm down. You may still have to face problems, but your mind starts to calm down, settle down, and doesn't create suffering or a self out of the problem. And then you can also see through the problem, and you see the problem is actually not really a problem, it's just an obstacle to go through, but it doesn't have to affect your mind and make your mind suffer. When you're calm, when you're mindful, you can do that. When we lose our mindfulness, then the slightest itch, the slightest hiccup, the slightest problem just becomes magnified and stops us from being at peace within ourselves, stops us being happy with other people, with the world. Everything becomes a problem. So keep practicing the mindfulness, keep reflecting on the Dhamma, and don't waste too much energy trying to get rid of the worldly winds. we can't do that. Ultimately, we have to rise above them through our practice. Bring the mind to transcend them rather than try and control the world to get rid of all the things we don't like, which is impossible. Just rise above it by knowing it's impermanent, it's not self. Don't create suffering out of those experiences. So maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight.
Hantamayang Vatakatha Satukarang Tatamase Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu